And so your journey reaches its end.
Oh, your armor won't save you from me.
By the time Ross cleared his throat behind me, I already hated Vesper. By the time Ross cleared his throat behind me, I already hated Vesper a little. On the main display, the planet filled half the screen. Blue-white clouds, bronze continents, a bright swath of ocean. Nothing wrong with it. That was the problem. Finley, final medical clearance. Ross hovered at my shoulder, boots hooked into the deck restraint, one hand on the back of my chin. The mission commander always looked like he was bracing for a punch, even during routine checklists.
A little impatient, aren't you?
Vitals for the landing.
You can't do anything right
I
now.
told him.
May
No one is going to
kindness
drop
remain
dead.
ever by your side.
I did not add, not from anything I could see. The transport shuddered as the descent thrusters kicked harder. A low vibration ran through the chair into my spine. Outside, Vesper's upper atmosphere stripped heat from the hull. The color balance on the forward feed shifted from white haze to brown cloud. Atmospheric mix.
A little
Perfect with
impatient,
intolerance,
aren't
if
you?
anything too clean.
You can't do anything
Trace
right
gases
now.
within human comfort range.
May kindness
No
remain
free
ever by
toxin.
your side.
Soil readings from the probe, rich in organics, almost no heavy metals, no background spores, no microbial signatures of any kind. Too easy, I mean. Ross heard that. What is? Everything. I pulled up the microbiology panel as if the whole biosphere might appear in the margins if I tried harder. We're about to walk onto a planet with water, oxygen, carbon, and no native life. Nothing microscopic in the air, nothing in the soil. No weird proteins, no rogue enzymes, just blanks. That is why we are here, Ross reminded me. You sign off that the blanks are real. I sign off that we can build on them. Corporate gets its new garden. Everyone gets paid. He sounded relaxed. He was not. I could hear the tension in the way he clipped each phrase, like he was swallowing other sentences. I am signing off that no current test shows danger, I countered. That is all I can give you. Ross squeezed my shoulder once and pushed off toward the cockpit. I will take that to mean you are done arguing with gravity. Strap in, Doctor. The ship dropped, steadied, dropped again. Miguel's voice came through the cabin intercom from the pilot seat. Touchdown in 30, he said. Try not to puke in your visor, gentlemen. That would be a rough first impression. I tightened my harness and glanced across the small cabin. Tariq met my eyes and raised his brows over his mask. A silent, "Are we okay?" I gave him the smallest nod I could manage. Tariq knew me well enough to read the gap between that nod and the truth. We broke through the last shelf of cloud. The forward feed showed a desert of low, rolling hills covered in bronze dust and brown stones, with a river cutting a dark line across the middle distance. The landing site sat on a flat patch near the riverbed, where the probe had already dropped an arm. Small equipment. Miguel jumped down, thrust the sheet of frost. The hull trembled. The vibration faded to a low hum through the night. Contact. Welcome to the Try not to break it. Harness buckle snapped through and stacked fast. I unhooked and floated for half a second, then pushed off toward the locker room. Helmets, surface suits, standard fuel tanks, everything laid out in convenient order, as comfortable as ritual can be. I pulled my suit off, checking seats, running fingers along joints that could kill me. When I reached for my helmet, my hand paused. Ross had his helmet on, chin strap loose, his dark hair plastered down from the top. We do not know why this air is so clean. If there is any kind of reactive agent out there, filters will pick it up faster than bare mucous membranes. We have done the scans. The probe breathed this air for weeks with a whole lab strapped to its back, and nothing grew in the dishes. He clicked his helmet. The faceplate polarized for a moment, then cleared. We will be cautious. We will also not suffocate ourselves just because Richard finally ordered something easy. I did not argue. I sealed my own helmet, checked everyone's info, and triggered the system. We cycled through the air. The inner door opened. The soft rush of equalizing color. The outer door lessened, letting light spill. No dramatic, just the quiet opening of metal into a world that had never heard the human voice. Vesper's daylight flooded the chamber, thin, pale, slightly muted by dust. The river lay off to the left, a flat strip of dark glass. The hills beyond looked low enough to walk in a day, their slopes smoothed by ages of wind. My boots touched Vesper's soil. It gave less than I expected, more compact than desert sand, more like very fine grit pressed into place. The ground carried a faint tremor from the thrusters as they wound down, then settled into stillness. Ross, Tariq breathed over the suit channel. This is... Look at it. It is waiting for us. That is the job. Ross stepped ahead purely for the symbolism of being first. Welcome to Vesper surface operations. Helmets stay on for now while we plant the habitat. Once we have internal readings and a clean cycle, we will talk about tasting the local air. That was a compromise. I took it. The first few hours were all motion and equipment. We walked supplies from the pallet to the clearing, locked down the modular habitat base, and watched Miguel swear at a stubborn support strut until it locked at the right angle. I did routine checks, heart rate, oxygen saturation, skin temp, quick ultrasound sweeps when someone complained about a twinge. No one had anything more serious than sore muscles and the usual cramped feeling after too long strapped into landing couches. Vesper stayed quiet. The soil core samples we took around the site all
A
looked
little
the same.
impatient, aren't you?
Fine bronze
You
grains,
can't do
a
anything right
scattering
now.
of small pale stones,
May kindness
consistent
remain
levels
ever
of
by your
carbon
side.
compounds at every depth. When we crushed a stone, its interior matched the outside. No veins, no inclusions. As if a child had sketched rock, and the planet had followed instructions exactly and no further. Near the ship, a line of larger boulders marked the edge of an old dry channel. Their surfaces were etched with thin, parallel grooves, each about as wide as a fingernail, running in straight bands from top to bottom, not worn curves. More like something had laid combs along them and pressed down, again and again. I brushed gloved fingers along one of the grooves. The stone felt slightly warmer than the air, as if it held some memory of the thruster's heat. I logged a quick note on my wrist unit for later. Grooves, unnatural, not wind. Check under micro. Quit romancing the rocks, Doctor. Miguel lugged a crate past me toward the habitat. We need you on filter duty before those air units clog with dust. Keep dreaming. I am not doing your maintenance. He grinned through his visor and kept walking. By the time the habitat inflated and the frame locked into place, the sun had tilted toward late afternoon. Ross authorized the first interior entry. We cycled through the airlock, dumped suits and helmets, and stood in our new box of home. The habitat walls were a pale, synthetic fiber stretched over ribs, anchored deep into the compacted soil. Floor plates clamped together under our boots. Overhead, the air unit purred as it pulled in outside gas through filters and released it into the room. Everyone peeled sweat-damp undersuits from their shoulders and eased muscles that had not loved the descent. A faint baked dust taste clung to the air, even after filtration. Not unpleasant. just present. Atmospheric monitors, Ross called. Stable, I answered, eyes on the handheld. Oxygen where we want it, no carbon spikes, no particulates over baseline. He looked around our small common space. Folding table, pinned down chairs, 2 workstations, 1 medrack in the corner. The walls shivered slightly with each gust of outside wind. We are not on a station in deep orbit anymore, Ross told us. This is a planet that will feed our grandchildren. Time to treat it like one. Helmets off are authorized inside the habitat. He unclipped his mask, then his collaring. For a moment, the only sound was the fan and the quiet tap of someone shifting their weight. Ross pulled his helmet free. Dark hair sprang damply up. He took his first unfiltered breath of Vesper and held it, eyes closed, like a man tasting the first sip of a long-promised drink. If anyone drops, I will make a note, I muttered. Tariq laughed and popped his own seals. Miguel followed. One by one, the other men slid out of their gear until I was the only one still half-suited. They were all watching me now. Not with open pressure. Just the kind of attention that says, if you hold us back, you had better have a reason stronger than a hunch. I unlatched my own helmet. The collar ring clicked loose. Cool air brushed sweaty skin at my throat. I lifted the helmet, set it on the floor, and inhaled Vesper. Dry. Thin. A little lighter than a sea-level breath on Earth. There was a taste of dust and something else under it, like stone that had never known moss or lichen. Blank. My chest tightened anyway, purely from nerves. Happy? Ross asked. Ask me in a week. He clapped me on the shoulder and moved off to his workstation. We worked through the rest of the day in the usual landing haze. Tariq ran his first full series of soil mixes at the bench, checking how Vesper dirt took water and fertilizer. Miguel pulled apart an air filter to check for early clogging. Ross drafted the first report to corporate. I set up the med bay in one corner, compact bed, diagnostic unit, tiny lab stack. Then I did what I always do on first day surface. I checked everyone. Quick scans, quick blood draws, quick questions. Any dizziness, any tingling, any unusual tastes or sensations. The routine took less than an hour. I stored baselines for comparison. By nightfall, exhaustion hit all at once. We ate, traded a few half-hearted jokes and fell into our bunks. Vesper's wind moved outside, rasping over the habitat's skin in long strokes. It sounded less like weather and more like breath. I did not sleep well. The cough started on the second day. We had split into pairs to run environment sweeps. Ross and Miguel took the river and a stretch of the far bank. I stayed near the habitat with Tariq, pulling soil cores at set distances. He was on his third sample when he coughed once. Then again, a dry bark that bent him slightly at the waist. Fine, he waved me off when I looked over. Too much dust in the helmet yesterday, that is all. Humor me. I slung my kit bag down next to him. If you die on my watch, I get paperwork. He rolled his eyes, but let me pop open the portable scope and fit the contact pad against his ribs. The handheld imager gave me a grey outline of lung fields, heart shadow, bone. Everything looked normal at first pass. I upped the resolution, tracing the delicate foam of air sacs and capillaries. There, along the lower edge of the right lung, in the region physicians always worry about. A faint cluster of rounded pockets that did not quite match the usual texture. A little too smooth, a little too regular, like glass beads tucked into foam. Tariq, I murmured, have you ever had pneumonia? Scarring? Once as a kid. Hospital, oxygen, the whole performance. He hesitated. Is there a mark? Possibly. A small one. I saved the image. The unit's tiny processor overlaid a comparison against baseline from orbit. The new pockets were not there before. I logged it as anomaly monitor because I did not have anything better to call it. He coughed again that evening during dinner. Miguel started complaining about grit on his skin when he sweated. Feels like beach sand, he muttered, rubbing at the inside of his elbow. When he lifted his arm, small crystals clung to the hair. They caught the light like grains of salt. You always this dramatic about your personal hygiene? Ross asked. Come closer. I will share. I scraped a few grains into a sample tube. Under the bench scope, they looked like tiny, dry seeds. Oval, faintly ridged, a little more organic than salt should be. I tapped one with the tip of a sterile probe. It cracked. The inside showed a different texture from the shell, but the magnification on this little toy would not tell me more. I ran a quick field test. Half the grains went into a slide with distilled water. The rest went onto a pinch of Vespa soil in a dish. The water set did nothing. The grains sank, sat, and stayed as what they were. The soil set changed. At first nothing, then a slight swell along the ridged sides. The shell split in a slow, clean line. Something inside pushed up, pale and soft as new fingernails. Under the scope, hair-thin filaments unfurled and sank into the surrounding dirt. Okay, I whispered. I collected myself and walked to the common table with the empty tube. Everyone listen, I told them. From now on, anything that comes off your body goes into containment. Sweat crystals, skin flakes, hair, nail clippings, anything. If you cough, I want it in a dish. If you sneeze, I want it in a dish. If you bleed, we do not wipe it on our pants and move on. We collect it, and I see it. Miguel lifted his brows. Romantic. This is not a joke. We have interaction between human excretions and Vespa soil that we did not see in pre-landing tests. Ross rubbed the bridge of his nose. Define interaction. Something in Miguel's sweat hardened into grains. Those grains opened in contact with Vespa soil and sent fibers into it. Nothing happened in water. I am not guessing about that. He leaned back, chair creaking. You think the planet is reacting to us? I think something out there recognizes us as more than tourists. Silence settled across the table. It was not comfortable, but it held. Fine, Ross decided. We add Finley's morbid souvenir collection to protocol. No one panics, no one slacks. We keep logging data. We keep working. He moved on to the next item. Supply checks, survey paths for the morning. I let the planning fade into the background while I watched Tariq, who had his hand pressed lightly to his chest. He caught me looking and forced a crooked smile. If something grows out of me, you are responsible for naming it. Absolutely not. The next morning, the wind came up early. Dust rose in curtains, blurring the edges of hills and ship. The sky went from clear to a pale, uniform smear. Sensors kept insisting everything was fine. We split again. This time Ross took the far ridge with two of the others. Miguel stayed at the habitat, working on exterior anchor points for a second module. I walked out with Tariq, following a line of flagged stakes that marked a radial transect from camp to the river. The ground underfoot felt slightly more packed than on the first day, like thousands of tiny pieces had settled under our boots. You know what bothers me? Tariq asked, stepping over a low rock. That you have not yet named a soil type after yourself. The soil is too consistent. Every sample I pull looks like the last one. Same grain size, same mix, same response to water. That is not how planets work. You get zones, layers, pockets. It is like someone laid down a single recipe and walked away. He coughed once, shook it off. We kept walking. By the time we reached the river, a fine film of dust coated our boots and lower legs. Vespa's water moved slowly, more like thick glass shifting in a long, patient wave than a busy current. I took readings while Tariq knelt at the bank and filled sample flasks. Do you ever think about how many worlds we might ruin by accident? He asked, still facing the water. That is a cheerful topic. I mean it. We bring seeds, microbes, stray spores everywhere we go. Little stories living in our guts. We step down, and the local story gets smothered. But here there is no local story. He straightened, wiped his glove on his thigh. You would think that would feel like a relief. It does not. He opened his mouth to answer. The cough hit him mid-sentence, not the dry little bark from before. This one ripped up from somewhere deep, folding him in half, sample flask flying. He braced his hands on his knees, helmet tilted toward the ground, body shuddering with each convulsion. Sound tore through the suit channel, rough and wet. Tariq, I grabbed his shoulder. Try to inhale slowly. Do not fight it. Useless advice, but doctors still say it even when we know better. Another violent cough racked him. Something dark spattered onto the dust between his boots. For one brittle second, I thought it was blood. Then I saw the shapes. They were not drops. They were small bags, each about the size of a pea, clustered together in a wet heap. Their outer skin looked translucent and faintly pearly, like fish eggs that had been dried out, then moistened again. Tariq wheezed and straightened, hand pressing against his chest. "I am fine," he rasped. "Just something caught." I guided him a step back. "Hold still." Through the visor, his face looked grey and strained, but his oxygen readout stayed in the green. Pulse up, but not dangerous, for the moment. I crouched over the heap between his boots. The bags shifted almost imperceptibly, not from internal motion, but from settling. A few had already rolled off the top of the pile and come to rest directly on bare ground where our boots had scuffed the dust aside. Where they touched Vesper soil, their skins began to twist. "Tariq, did you have anything in your throat when we left the habitat? Food? Fluid?" "No." As we watched, the first bag cracked. A thin line opened along one side. Pale matter bulged out, then pushed free, unfurling in the open air. A hair-thin stalk extended upward, glistening, then split into two flared leaves. Within moments, faint green threaded through them, color deepening as if drawn up from the ground. Another bag cracked. Another stalk rose. The pile of coughed-up mass turned into a tiny cluster of plants, each no higher than my thumb. I felt a tick in my jaw, the old warning pulse of tension that meant my body understood something before my mind did. This was too fast. Faster even than engineered growth mediums on a station. The leaves oriented themselves not to the pale sun, but to the direction of the river, as if chasing moisture instead of light. I snapped a sample vial from my belt, scooped two of the intact bags and one new sprout into it, and sealed it before they could push roots through the vial's base. "Back to the habitat," I ordered. "Now." Tariq did not argue this time. The walk back blurred. Every few steps I checked him. No new coughs, oxygen steady. The vial in my hand felt absurdly small, too fragile for what it held. At the airlock, I triggered decontamination. We stood still while fine particles of neutralizing powder rained down from above, clinging to suits and equipment. Lights pulsed green when the cycle finished. Inside, I marched straight to the med rack and slammed the vial into the main scope cradle. The feed filled my little screen. One intact bag, one split one sprout caught in mid-rise. Up close, the bag wall looked like a film made from human lung tissue. I recognized the faint branching network on its surface, vessels pressed flat and repurposed. The fibers inside the sprout matched no plant structure I knew, but along the base, where it met the shriveled remnants of the capsule, a ring of cells still held the shape of an alveolus, the tiny air sac at the end of our breathing tree. My own imaging baseline flashed in my mind, those new pockets in Tariq's lung. Behind me, I heard the clatter of someone bumping a chair. Ross, probably. Miguel drawing closer. I kept my eyes on the screen. Vesper had no life yesterday. Today, it did. It had grown from Tariq's cough, from Miguel's sweat, from our bodies. Ross stepped up beside me before I could frame the words. "What am I looking at, Doctor?" On the screen, Tariq's sprout finished straightening, leaves opening in slow confidence. That ring of lung tissue at the base looked like a scar someone had repurposed. "My patient," I answered, "and Vesper's first houseplant." Miguel leaned in on my other side, one hand braced on the bench. "That came out of Tariq?" He coughed the capsules up. I said. They only opened when they touched Vesper soil. Not water, not our equipment, just this dirt. You saying he is infected? Infected implies something that was already here. There was nothing here. No microbes, no spores, nothing. We checked every medium. Then Tariq breathes this air and suddenly his lungs can do this. The room went quiet. The fan in the corner pushed out a stream of processed Vesper air and our own exhalations. Ross folded his arms, eyes on the screen. Talk to me, like I am the person who has to explain this to people who sign contracts. What do we actually know, right now? I stared at the sprout. It swayed a little in the vial, as if feeling for gravity. We know the planet does not show any independent life, I said. We also know that when human tissue leaves our bodies and touches Vesper soil, it changes. Very fast. It uses our cells as a template. I tapped the ring at the base of the sprout. That is lung structure right there. It is not mimicry, it is literally Tariq's tissue rearranged. Miguel let out a slow breath. So the planet is growing a garden out of us. That is one way to put it. Ross watched the screen a moment longer, then turned away. We treat it like any other hazard. We tighten containment, we log everything. We do not leap to mystical conclusions. No panic, no drama. Understood? I could have argued. Instead, I forced the shape of a nod. The next few hours blurred into procedures. I took more blood, more scans, more samples. I repeated Tariq's imaging series and watched those new pockets in his lung deepen and round out like fruit on a branch. I added rules because rules were the only thing that felt firm. We doubled decontamination cycles at the airlock. Anything that could trap dust or droplets stayed near the hatch instead of drifting around our living space. The others grumbled, but they complied. Fear will do that for you. The first sprout in the vial grew a second leaf by night, and a pale root coiled around the glass like a finger. I barely slept. By the third morning, the planet started answering back in scale. I stepped out of the habitat and almost missed the new color. It was subtle, just a faint wash of greenish tone along the ground within a few paces of the base, like someone had dusted the soil with ground-up plant matter. Another step, and the dust under my boot gave a crackle instead of its usual grainy slide. I crouched. Tiny shoots no taller than my thumbnail studded the ground. Each one had a translucent stem and two narrow leaves with veins too fine to see at first glance. The shoots clustered thickest around the spots where we'd stood the longest, or where we'd tossed wash water the day before. Behind me, Miguel climbed down the habitat steps with a crate in his arms. You see it too? I see a lot of somethings, I answered. Came up during the night, he went on. Looked like bare dirt when we turned in. I stepped out before dawn and almost tripped. It is like the ground tried to grow stubble while we were asleep. He nudged the nearest patch with his boot. A few shoots snapped. Clear fluid glistened in the broken tips, then beaded and sank into the soil. I scooped up a small cluster with my scraper and dropped them into a sample tub. Their roots came up easily, very shallow for now. Any of you piss outside the line? I asked. Miguel snorted. You wrote that rule in block letters, remember? No personal runoff on Vesper until Dr. Doom gives the all clear. Good. Then this is coming from what we dropped during normal activity. Sweat, dust, skin. The little things that ride with us no matter how careful we are. Ross joined us, helmet tucked under one arm, eyes sweeping the ground. Report. These are not random seeds, I told him. They are growing where we have been, where we touched the ground where we stood, where we dumped grey water. Wherever we leave traces, Vesper uses them. Lung plants from Tariq, Miguel muttered. Skin grass from the rest of us. The names he tossed off as jokes kept sticking in my notes. Maybe that was how humans handle losing control. We slap labels on what scares us. Ross pointed at the expanding ring of growth. So we burn this back from the habitat and see how it responds. We treat it like any other invasive. We do not know how it stores energy or how it spreads, I warned. If we scorch it, we might feed it. Some systems love fire. We are not living in a green noose, Ross answered. Not while we have fuel. He signaled Miguel, who dumped his crate and fetched a small field burner from the equipment rack. The burner was a simple device. A tank, a nozzle, a steady flame hot enough to sterilize small areas or cut through thin metal. Miguel walked a slow circle around the habitat, spraying a narrow band into the ground. The new shoots blackened and collapsed, leaving a ring of charred soil and ash. We watched. At first, the burned band held. The surviving plants beyond it swayed in the breeze but did not cross. Ross gave me a look that said, "See? Simple." Within an hour, pale filaments began to lift from the ash like tiny threads. They coiled together, then thickened, sucking something from the burned layer. New shoots emerged along the inside edge of the ring, larger than the original ones, leaves a deeper green. They used your fire as fertilizer, I told Ross. You just fed them a hot meal. He watched the new growth define a sharp, dark line around our home. Then we stop wasting fuel on pretend control. We log the reaction and we move on. More symptoms showed up by afternoon. Miguel cut his finger open on a jagged bolt while adjusting an exterior anchor. It was not a dramatic injury, just a torn flap of skin and a shallow gash across the pad. I cleaned it in the airlock and wrapped it, thinking more about contamination risk than his pain. While I worked, a few drops of his blood had fallen onto a spare panel leaning near the hatch. The panel had dust on it from the work outside. By the time I noticed, the droplets had changed. They were no longer round smears. Each had stretched into a tiny starburst, arms thin and bright, creeping away from the center. The red had faded to a rusty brown. At the tip of each line, a microscopic curve formed like a hook. "Do not touch that," I told Miguel. He froze, hand halfway toward the panel. "You really think I want that under my nails?" I scraped one starburst into a dish and carried it straight to the scope. Under magnification, the lines resolved into small, segmented bodies. They reminded me of glassy centipedes, each no longer than a grain of sand curled in place. The bulk of them still held traces of Miguel's blood cells twisted into new shapes. When I warmed the dish slightly with a thumb on the heating pad, the little bodies woke. They uncurled and began to move. Coordinated crawling, each segment flexing in sequence as they sought the edges of the dish, pressing against the boundary. I flipped the dish over onto a thin layer of Vespa soil. The creatures moved faster, diving into the dust with a kind of blind urgency. They vanished from view, leaving behind fine tunnels. Miguel leaned forward, frowning. "So I bleed, and the planet gets bugs. Blood," he said. "Or something very much like them, built from your blood in contact with vegetables." We watched the soil surface bulge in one side for a tunnel. A few moments later, a thicker form broke through, a larger version of the tiny things. This one long enough to bridge the width of my little dish. It flexed twice and burrowed down. I logged it as another attention. Tariq, standing in the door, breathed carefully.